56% are insects and arthropods. So that means out of this 1.2 million, 56%, more than half, in fact 956,000 species are insects and arthropods. And there is a prediction even by some naturalists that one day this planet may be taken over by insects. That's a prediction, not that it will happen. But most microbiologists today consider this estimate, that is this 1.5 to 1.8 million, as a severe underestimate, gross underestimate. Why? Simple argument. Now there are 956,000 species of insects. If we squeeze each one of them and put them on a microbiological plate, there will be so many bacteria growing. So how come that the estimate of microorganisms is so small? So this shows that it is a gross underestimate. Now with the techniques of molecular biology, we can detect many microorganisms which cannot be cultured in the lab. To identify a species, you have to isolate, culture, look at its characteristics, and then give it a name. Now if you can't culture them, that means you can't identify. So what has happened really is a limitation of our methodology, that we are still unable to isolate all the microorganisms and identify them. With the molecular techniques, now it has increased a lot. And now they are listing, microbiologists are listing thousands and thousands of species of what are called unculturable microorganisms, that they cannot be cultured in the lab. So when you put all that, now the estimate ranges from the estimate ranges from 5 to 100 million. The range has gone up to 5 to 100 million from 1.75 to. So what you have to have in mind as future scientists is that there are many more species of living organisms than reported now. And it is up to you to find these new species in the future. Okay? So that's one area where you can work. Now these species diversity is not purely numbers. The range of diversity extends from size, lifespan, form, nutrition, reproduction, life cycles, habitat. So every aspect of a living organisms show a range of diversity. Now take the size for instance. A bacterium is something which is a few microns, which means you cannot see a bacterial cell properly unless you stain it and look at it under the oil immersion magnification of the lens of the microscope. And oil immersion magnification magnifies the image 1,000 times. Then only you can see this tiny bacterial cell. So it's so small. Now starting from such minute organisms, the size extends all the way up to these huge trees that we see around us, and the huge whales that you see in the oceans. Okay. Now among all living organisms is something to remember. We will take it up with the lifespan also. Just as much as these bacteria and microorganisms are small, they multiply very rapidly. Given proper conditions of growth, a bacterium can multiply every 20 minutes. Every 20 minutes, they can form a new generation. So the lifespan is 20 minutes. Whereas if you take tortoise, the lifespan would be somewhere around 250 years. A human being around 85. A tree, thousands of years. The lifespan of a tree could be thousands of years. In fact, it's good to remember that in the entire world, the oldest tree with a recorded history, the oldest tree with a recorded history is our Srima Pole. Now it is more than 2,500, close to 2,600. That's the oldest tree in the entire world with a recorded history. Of course, there are many other trees especially in Siberian region, North America and so on, called the giant redwoods, which are much bigger and older in terms of calculations. When you cut such a tree, you can calculate the age by calculating the annual rings. And this is a picture of such tree. This is from the redwoods of Northern California. You can't see the top because it's as tall as some 400 odd feet. And just to compare the size, that's myself and my wife at the bottom of this tree. You can see how small we are compared to the base of the tree. Compared to the base of the tree. The tree extends from here to here and still we couldn't cover. So that's a huge biomass. Now remember, therefore among all living things, the trees are the biggest and the longest living. Animals are also, whales are big, but not certainly not as much, and they don't live as long as trees. So another thing to remember. Now we go back to lifespan and size we have come from form. Then you take the form, the shape of different organisms, which you obviously see under the microscope as well as when you look around. Start with simple cells among bacteria and certain algae, certain cyanobacteria, which used to be called blue-green algae. They are single cells. Starting from single cells, you have groups of cells called colonies. Then there are specialized colonies called coenobia. They are all colonies, so gatherings, clusters of these unicellular organisms. Then you have filaments, simple filaments. Filaments with different types of cells called differentiated filaments. Filaments which are branched. Filaments which show different thalli, heterotypous thalli they are called. You will learn this when you come to the university and higher studies, prostate system and erect system. Then you have parenchymatous thalli, simple parenchymatous thalli like vulva. And then you have complex tissues. When you come to plants and animals, complex tissues. Parenchyma, sclerenchyma, parenchyma, different types of tissues. Then you have specialized organs like hands, mouth. And in the case of trees, you have leaves, branches, roots. And finally, these organs form an organism. So you see the range of diversity in form, starting from unicellular, traveling through colonial, coenobial, filamentous, parenchymatous tissues, specialized organs and organisms. Very wide range. Then we take nutrition. Take nutrition again, there is a diversity. In the first place, you can divide these organisms to autotrophic and heterotrophic. Autotrophic means they manufacture their own food, mostly by photosynthesis, but not necessarily. Sometimes there are chemosynthetic organisms. They also manufacture their own food through chemical reactions from carbon dioxide and water available around in the environment. Those are autotrophic. They are able to manufacture their own food on their own. Then there are a whole group of organisms which are heterotrophic. The fungi, the bacteria, viruses, and the whole works. They depend on food from other sources. They can't make their own food. They assimilate from outside and then that's autotrophic, heterotrophic. Among the autotrophic, as I said, we have chemosynthetic, we have photosynthetic organisms. Among the heterotrophs, we have free living, associative, symbiotic, parasitic, and so on. So there again, we see a diversity in terms of nutrition. In terms of reproduction, when organisms reproduce, when you go to the simple organisms like chlamydomonas or bacteria, the entire mother cell, when it comes to reproduction, reproductive stage, converts itself to reproductive units and then die off. That is the entire content, the entire body converts itself. So that is called holocarpic. Holocarpic means the entire. Now most other organisms, including humans, only a part of your body tissues are used for reproduction. Those are called eukaryotes. So here again you see a difference. And then among the different types of reproduction, you can have gametic copulation, you can have vegetative, asexual, that's two spores, as well as sexual. Among the sexual, you have gametic copulation, that is gametes combine with them. Gametangial copulation, like in Spirogyra and Rhizopus, muco, the gametangia is fused with one another, oogamy, anisogamy, isogamy, anisogamy, oogamy, all different types of reproduction. So there again it is a wide range of diversity. Life cycles. Now life cycles can be very simple, like in the Chlamydomonas or Spirogyra or simple bacteria. Just the entire life cycle, the organism is haploid. Only 10 haploid. Then it is called a haplontic life cycle. Otherwise, the organism can be changing from haploid to diploid. That is, after fusion of the two gametes, you get a diploid zygote. And then the diploid zygote, instead of undergoing reduction division, it gives rise to another phase of the life cycle, like in the bryophytes, or like in ectocarpus, or in vulva. You have a diploid life cycle phase coming in. In that case, you call it a changing from diploid to haploid, haploid to diploid life cycle. You call it a diplohaplontic life cycle. The single one is haplontic, diplohaploid. Sometimes in certain red algae, which you don't do yet for A levels, you get 3 phases: diplohaplontic, or haplodiplotic. That's 1N, 2N, or 2N and 1, two phases of 2N and 1N. So there are various types of life cycles as well. Then of course habitats, we will be elaborating on this when you go to ecosystem diversity. Different organisms grow in different habitats, very often in very good harmony with the environment. So what did I essentially tell you? There is a range of diversity in size, lifespan, form, nutrition, reproduction, life cycles, and things. Now what is responsible for this diversity? Why do we see this so much of variation and variability? The reason is genetic diversity. This is the basis. Because, of course, all organisms contain DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. They are contained in chromosomes or chromatids, but they are not identical. There are differences. And the basis for all those wide ranges of diversity we saw in all the aspects, that means morphological as well as the ability of organisms to do certain things, depends upon genetics. I think Dr. Tamika Maganalachi will tell you later how this is controlled, how the genetics control the different abilities of organism, from its appearance to its ability to do certain things through the production of enzymes. Because the genes give the signals are then translated or converted into certain amino acids, and they form the different enzymes. So the different enzymes that enable organisms to do certain things and also certain organisms not to do so. Now this genetics is a result of evolution and natural selection over a period of 3.8 billion years, because life is estimated to have originated some 3.8 billion years ago. Since then, interacting with the changes in the environment, Mother Nature has endowed upon us all this genetic diversity. We talk nucleotides, DNA, which is the self-replicating organic molecules, which is identified as the first form of life. And sometimes these genes are arranged in chromosomal as well as plasmid, that's outside the chromosome. When you say genome, it includes both these. And that is composed of nuclear material, finally inside organisms. Now remember, all organisms do not have nuclei. There is a whole group of organisms, bacteria, cyanobacteria and actinobacteria, which are not surrounded by a membrane and they do not have a nucleus. What do we call them? Can anyone of you tell me? Prokaryotic, pragmastical. That is something before the nucleus. Before the nucleus, they are called prokaryotic, and most of the other organisms, of course, including Chlamydomonas, are eukaryotic or nuclear. So this is an invaluable pool of genetic material. Now we have to consider this as the common heritage of mankind. Mother Nature has given this to us over working through 3.8 billion years. Now we get to ecosystems, so ecological diversity and ecosystems. Now how do you part into? Now we are individuals. You all are each boy and girl, and myself a man, an old man, and but we live as families, parents and children. Then the extended families, your mother's sisters, your father's brothers and sisters. So even other individuals like that, individuals form families, and then families live in a community, in a particular village, several families live. They are in nature, they are called herds or groups, and then all put together in a particular area or particular country, you call it a population. Then communities, ecosystem is where the individuals interact with the non-living environment and make use of the non-living environment, and this is where we are going to talk about more, how you should interact with the environment to live in harmony, but that is not happening all the time. Then of course ecosystems put together form bio, and the entire living world is called the biosphere, because the earth is a spherical globe, and we have the biosphere, the living globe, and the non-living globe, as well as the atmosphere, the gaseous globe around us. Now these are the ecosystem diversity that you see in Sri Lanka. I hope to show you tomorrow a slideshow showing the diversity, which is beautiful, which is in Sri Lanka. We are an island, therefore the entire country is surrounded by the sea. Obviously, therefore we have a coastal ecosystem, and the marine littoral vegetation is the just below the beach, the coastal beach, and the water, underwater, sea water, there's a littoral system. Then we have the seesaw vegetation coming in out of the water, and then as you move in, you have the tropical thorny shrubland vegetation, the dry thorn forests as we call them. Among that, you also see lagoons and mangroves. Then the tropical dry mixed evergreen forests. Evergreen means the trees don't shed their leaves once a year. It doesn't happen, so you call them evergreen, but they are dry and mixed. Then the wet evergreen forests, which are also called rainforests. The tropical submontane area, when you go a little higher than Kandy, you get the tropical submontane. Then the montane forest right on top, around our area, Aggala, Ambevere areas. Then within the ecosystems, we have riverine vegetation, which are different from the rest, along the rivers, ponds and reservoirs, wetlands and so on. So these are, now we have a picture of ecosystem diversity. Ecosystem is living organisms and the associated non-living environment. Now among these ecosystems, it is good to understand that there are certain species which are important to the ecosystem, or flagship species. This really is an artificial name because it is connected to the culture of a country or an area or a nation. It's not a natural country, but still it is called a flagship. Now in Sinhala it is called Rajayadari. Rajayadari Vishesha. Now this is a little misleading. I remember once there was an advanced level question named the Rajayadari, flagship species of Sri Lanka. A lot of students wrote the lion singer. Hey, Rajayadari? Flag එක තියෙන්නේ wrong. The flagship species of Sri Lanka, although our flag contains an image of a lion, is not lion. It is the elephant. Because it is the one, that is the animal connected with our culture. So like that, different countries have, now the flagship species of Australia is kangaroo. Not that it is in their flag, but it is a culturally related species. Now this is more important in terms of ecology, keystone species. keystone species is could be one or more. The existence of that species determines the stability of the ecosystem. If it is destroyed or minimized below a critical level, the entire ecosystem can collapse. So it's an important species. Now certain fruit-eating bats of certain areas are keystone because they are the ones which go and eat the fruits and disperse the seeds. The entire ecosystem. Now in South Africa, there's a species of trees and there are extents of such ecosystems having very long tubular flowers. And only a particular insect, bird, with a long neck, and a particular butterfly with a very long proboscis can pollinate. Now if that butterfly or that bird is destroyed, by any chance, the entire ecosystem can collapse. So a keystone species is just one or more species that determines the stability of the ecosystem. Remember that. And in the oceans, particularly in the marine environment of the Pacific Ocean, the giant kelps, the huge brown algae, I don't think we have them in Sri Lanka. Some of these brown algae can be as long as 150 feet, huge. Those are the keystone species. In the tropical countries like Sri Lanka, the corals have been identified as keystone species for certain marine ecosystems. If you destroy the corals, the entire ecosystem can get eliminated. Then of course, species confined to an area, country or region is called an endemic species. That is also very important because if that ecosystem is broken and that species is destroyed or extinct, then nowhere else in the world can you find it. Sri Lanka has an endemicity of 25% of plant species are endemic and 28% of animal species are endemic. So our country is considered to be a hotspot in terms of endemic species. Because if those species are destroyed or lost, that will be lost to the entire world. Now this is something that we have forgotten completely. You all and I breathe fresh air. But we don't think even for a moment, where does this fresh air come from? Are they coming from supermarkets? Or the municipality supplying that to us? No, it's freely available because all around us are this green vegetation. They absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and produce oxygen. So all aerobic organisms, including man, owe their lives to the green plants and other green vegetation, including algae, which provides us this oxygen. But nobody takes any notice. It's taken for granted. And water purification. So air purification is oxygenation, absorbing carbon dioxide. Hydrological cycle, Jala Chakra. Water purification through filtering through the rainforests, which all the different vegetation underground. Erosion and flood control. Now if you remove, I'll show tomorrow the slides, the top vegetation, how the water flows. And today we are experiencing several landslides and floods all over Sri Lanka because we have disturbed some of our protective forest vegetations. Cycling of nutrients. Take it for granted that all organic matter, dead matter, everyone dies and goes on to the substrate, the soil. If it is left like that without decomposing, we won't get the nutrients back. And there will be piles and piles of dead tissue, including all animals and plants. But continuously, these tiny bacteria and fungi which we don't see with the naked eye are doing a wonderful job of converting these back into mineral form which can be reabsorbed. So this recycling of nutrients is also being done by the living ecosystems. aesthetic, of course. When we come to Kandy, we see how beautiful it is. When we go to Gora area or the coastal belt, everybody can enjoy a stable ecosystem. If it is destroyed, if it's all concrete, you probably will enjoy for a few months, but after that you get fed up of it. Now, although we have not, we have not given this a value, taken for granted, as I say, it's just available. The Smithsonian Institute of USA, Washington, D.C., they are studying nature, they continue, the entire institute is devoted for that. They have done some estimates. Can you imagine the estimate? Microorganisms, cycling of nutrients, equivalent to $33 billion a year. Huge amount, that is $33,000 billion. Much bigger than the Sri Lankan budget. Insect pollination. We grow mangoes, dule and all these other plant trees. They are not pollinated. You won't get fruits. If you go to hand pollinate them or mechanically pollinate them, what is the cost? That's the type of methodology used to do these estimations. 30 billion value. Ecotourism, 28 billion. So like that, all these add up to, and it says that the global estimate they have done for the world, the ecosystem services works out to 33 trillion. Not billion, but now this time is 1,000, a trillion is 1,000 billion. 33 trillion, and it is stated that this is slightly more than double the products and services produced by man. Now, the whole world has so much of industries producing cars, trains, airplanes, and computers and food and all that. All what man is producing and all the services that man is providing through industry like communications, satellite communications, TV, those are services. Put together is around half this value. So even today, nature is providing us services, the value that is double that all what man can produce. Remember that. So we should not destroy nature. We should look after nature. These are of course the direct uses of biodiversity. Now the moment we start using biodiversity, whether it's in agriculture, horticulture, or whatever it is list, is then considered as bioresources. Now the biodiversity becomes bioresources, a resource which we can use, we have to use. Otherwise we can't live. Or sometimes it's better called bio-wealth because it is valuable. So bioresources or bio-wealth, that part of the biodiversity which we use for our benefit. And obviously we know that when there's an increase in human population, there's pressure on the bioresources. This is happening all the time. It's happening now far more actively. Now, an interesting aspect that all of you as young people who are going to be future leaders, some of you at least, are the kind of leaders we have today, I hope, is to remember that we have what is called the developed world and the developing world. It's a diplomatic, glamorous term to call rich countries and poor countries. Instead of calling poor countries, they call us developing countries. How did this happen? Of course, in the 17th century, there was something called the Industrial Revolution, which some of the countries started developing very rapidly due to industries using the resources, I would say exploiting the resources, without any consideration to what happens to the environment. But they managed to make guns, make airplanes, a lot of industries which could rapidly give man something. At the same time, getting into such power, particularly the development of armaments, weapons that would kill others, they colonized the weaker nations. Sri Lanka was a victim. The Portuguese, Dutch, and eventually the British came and colonized us. Forcefully killed people. They colonized India, they colonized Burma, they colonized Malaysia. In fact, there was a time that sun never set on the British Empire because from west to east, they owned some countries somewhere in the world, from Hong Kong to all the way to the Grenada and the West Indies. So by that, then after colonization, they naturally exploited most of our resources. That's why instead of having this rainforest, we have a lot of tea. Now tea brings an income, but we didn't grow tea. Somebody else put tea on us. Okay. So as a result of this, the world got categorized into developed world, developing world, and the underdeveloped world. Well, if you take the African countries, they are even worse off than us. That's also due to both industrialization and exploitation. And interestingly enough, these so-called developed countries, the people, comprise only 20% of the world population, but they use 80% of the energy and 85% of the world economy. Completely disproportionate. But nobody can do anything about it. Because they have got that kind of lifestyles. Each family has, instead of one vehicle, has about 4 vehicles. So they are making use of resources. Fossil fuel, pollution of the environment, all the spare parts, the tires for the vehicles. That's just taking one example. And their lifestyle, the eating habits, all that is very disproportionate to what a person or a child in a poor country can afford. So they use 80%, 20% uses 80 to 85% of the world economy. Now interestingly enough, this statement has been made by a scientist from the Smithsonian Institute. If everyone wants to enjoy the standard of living of an average US citizen, American citizen, it would require 4 more planet Earths to support them. Because if everyone tries to live like that, these resources of the Earth is not enough. We need 4 times the resources. That is the reality. Now we have to remember this very strongly, very well, in using bioresources. Because everyone wants to, including you and I, we like to live comfortably like an American in a huge air-conditioned SUV. And you go in bullet trains like in Japan. You would like to do that. But if you really try to do that, then you will need 4 more planet Earths. We just can't. That's something unachievable. Now, as a result of exploitation, here I use the word exploitation, this is what man has brought about. All large mammal species in the Mediterranean Sea islands have been completely destroyed. No more large mammals in those. There were, but not anymore. Similarly, in the West Indies, endemic sloths, monkeys, rodents, snakes have been killed completely. Extinct. Madagascar, 24 species of mammals, birds and tortoises. Hawaii, 66% of all vertebrates. Can you imagine? They are killed. And 90% of all the land birds, they are killed. New Zealand, frogs, lizards and 30 species of birds. So these are examples from different parts of the world. While they developed, they did not care a damn about the surrounding environment. Whatever that they thought is not useful, they just destroyed, killed. The same way they destroyed their forests and other natural ecosystems. We'll see. Now, consequences of overexploitation of habitats is environmental degradation and habitat loss, and at the same time produce loads of waste. Loads of waste. I have been to New York. I have lived in New York for a short period. New York has a river like our Bear Lake. It runs across the Manhattan city. Huge barges. Barges as twice the size of this building. Every day you see huge barges of waste being transported along the Hudson River. Of course, they are using it now. They are recycling. They are producing energy out of it. That's now. But that is the enormous amount of waste they produce. Now we know we have the same problem. Every other day on TV, we see piles and piles of municipal waste and some problem that they are being dumped somewhere and it leads to a lot of diseases multiplication of mosquitoes, multiplication of flies and so on, people are complaining. So that's handling waste. Waste is an inevitable product of exploitation of resources. And as a result, what have we got now? Industrial revolution days, nobody knew about it, nobody cared about the environment. They tried to get the maximum, that's called exploitation, not utilization of biodiversity. So, overexploitation resulted in all what we have here today. We are facing global warming, which is threatening it, acid rain, rising sea level, damage due to the ozone layer, and reduction of biodiversity and increase of species. Now, give a little thought to the damage to the ozone layer. What does the ozone layer do? The ozone layer is about atmosphere. There's a covering of ozone. This minimizes the radioactive radiation coming from the sun. Sun's rays have a lot of radioactive radiation, UV and infrared and all kinds of radiations which are dangerous to us. It can cause cancer, it can cause genetic changes in the chromosomes of human beings and other animals. It also, when the radiation comes in, it also triggers off rapid mutation of viruses, bacteria and so on. That is why today we have all these sudden flus, different types of dengue flu, bird flu, all kinds of pig flus and this and that, because the viruses and the bacteria change so rapidly and become virulent due to radiation. More radiation is now coming through the earth because we have destroyed or thinned our protective ozone layer. So all these are man-made because man exploited the resources. This is what we have now got. Now everybody is concerned. Now at least there is awareness, and every one of us should be aware. We start thinking of how to use bioresources. Example: America. When during development over the years they have transformed. They had original tall grass prairies, 99% transformed. Original forest in the 48 contiguous states means Hawaii is also a US state. Alaska is also a US state. They are not contiguous, but the rest of the American continent, 98%, 95% of the forests are lost. 98% of the Midwest oak savanna is being altered. Old growth forest of the Pacific Northwest, 90% cleared. Wild scenic rivers, 90 to 98% degraded. Coastal scrub jungle, 70 to 90% disturbed. So this is what America has brought about on themselves due to what is called development. And 50% of their wetlands. This is because somehow or other they protected the huge wetland. It's called the Florida Everglades wetland. In size, it is almost equal to the size of Sri Lanka. The wetland is equal to the size of Sri Lanka. They protected that, and that is why wetlands remain 50%, but otherwise it would have also gone over 80%. So they have altered and destroyed and transformed and cleared most of their natural ecosystems as a result of development. What are we doing? What are we doing? We are also trying to emulate them. Every government that comes wants more roads, more highways, more sky-rise buildings, more airports, more harbors. So as long as the moment you do that continuously, we are destroying the natural ecosystem. So we are not learning from this. Now America is very careful. They are protecting their ecosystems and they want to give aid, also get markets done, factories opened in other countries, in China, in Bangladesh, in Vietnam, in Sri Lanka, so that we prepare things for them at the cost of our natural resources. Now these are some of the uses of biodiversity, because some people might ask, what is this biodiversity? Why should we worry about it? No, there are a lot of possibilities, particularly in the pharmaceutical industry, particularly in the preparation of new medicines. A lot of things have come from nature. and they will continue to come from nature. I think day after tomorrow or something, Professor Dilip De Silva from Colombo will be elaborating more on this, the possible pharmaceutical products coming from the marine environment. He is an expert in that. I think he will be covering. So essentially, natural product chemistry, which we at IFS also has a very strong group working on this, is searching for new chemicals useful to man, particularly in medicine, but also cosmetics, in other useful things. And this is in the marine environment and tropical rainforest, there are a lot of undiscovered uses. But we must use them sustainably. We should not exploit them to extinction. Now there is a problem, because every now and then we see some people coming on TV, and of course it's good to be concerned, particularly Jagat Gunawardena, an environmental lawyer, appears on TV and says, that's biopiracy, foreigners are coming and taking our genetic material, and so on. Yes, it is happening. We have to be alert. Our customs and authorities should be concerned about it. But there is a way of doing things, because we have resources, we don't have the technology. The developed countries have destroyed their resources, they have modern technology. So the best thing, as I said, biodiversity is a human heritage, a heritage of all mankind. Not necessarily belongs to the Japanese, or the Pakistanis, or the English, or the British, or the Americans. It also belongs to us. It belongs to the entire humanity. In this country, we are temporary custodians of that biodiversity. But we must learn how to share and make maximum. And that is what the International Convention on Biodiversity did way back in 1972, I think, in Rio de Janeiro, 1992, they laid down 3 conditions. To use biodiversity, you need to have prior informed consent. That is, all the countries that are involved must give their consent to use. And they should agree to mutually agreed terms that would ensure equitable distribution of benefits. This did never happen before. As I said, when we were colonized, when we were under the British, Sri Lankans were never asked whether we should come and change your rainforest to tea estates, or change your other dry zone forests and so on to rubber estates and cinnamon and so on. They did it. That is to have an economy, agricultural economy, to support their industries. It can't happen anymore. According to these UN resolutions, you have to have prior informed consent. You have to tell the other party, this is what we are going to do with your biodiversity. This will be useful to both of us. This will be useful to all mankind. Let us get together and do this. So you have to obtain consent. And then you have to also agree to mutually beneficial terms, because obviously when you get a product out of a biodiversity, like getting quinine out of cinchona plant for malaria, then it was sold. It brought millions of dollars. Now you have to share that between the parties working together, the resource owner as well as the one who developed the technology. So mutually agreed terms that will ensure equitable distribution of benefits. Now that is the way to go. That is the way to utilize biodiversity in a sustainable manner. But you all from Sri Lanka should be knowledgeable to negotiate for these terms. Otherwise we all can be taken for granted. That has happened. That is happening even today. The Japanese come and give us a germ custom building, or build a parliament. The Chinese come and put up an amphitheater in Colombo, or harbour in Hambantota. We get carried away. Our big brother is helping us. But there are always strings attached to these things. Then they negotiate various things. And then our people, our scientists should be knowledgeable enough to see what they are aiming at and negotiate to get equitable distribution of benefits. So remember, you are learning science not just to get a BSc or a medical degree and get a good job. You have to, at least some of you have to learn science and know what we have, the bio wealth we have, and to protect the bio wealth, to negotiate you should be knowledgeable to negotiate with the other parties to utilize this biodiversity sustainably. Now I'll touch upon a little bit about what is happening in Sri Lanka in the name of development. I have already shown you what has happened in certain countries. They have killed most of the animals and so on. The USA, how they degraded and destroyed their forests and so on. Even in Sri Lanka, some of the activities over the years are now, we can see that there are certain things that are indicated. Now, in Sri Lanka, we see these changes happening in the water bodies we have, the ancient tanks, the new reservoirs, as well as streams and so on, lakes and so on, the water bodies. Because they are very, very easily observed what happens there in relation to development. If a water body gets polluted due to human activity, it can be construction sites, erosion, clearing of jungles, bringing down a lot of washings and fertilizers, additional loads of fertilizers in the high country, bringing the pollution down the streams to lakes and reservoirs, as well as it can be a simple thing like using washing powder in bathing places, which you have to do as the population increases, because washing powder contains a lot of phosphates, and phosphate is a pollutant that leads to algal blooms, like that, and industries which are dumping chromium, cadmium and other heavy metals into our water bodies, the streams flow down and get stagnated in the reservoirs in Anuradhapura area and deep down south Ampara, Ambatata, Pellava areas. So if a water body is less polluted, remember this, the algal biomass, the total amount of algae in such a less polluted water body is small. It is there, algae have to be there with water, but it is small and it's also diverse. So two aspects. The water body is nice and less polluted, non-polluted. If you see a small amount of algae but a diversity in terms of the species and groups. Like, say you can have chlorophyceae, you can have diatoms, bacillariophyceae, you also can have blue-green algae or cyanobacteria. All the species are there, diverse species but small amount. Then the water body is less polluted. But when a water body gets polluted by various activities, mostly by humans and sometimes also by a little bit by animals, then those algal species which cannot withstand pollution die and they vanish. And only those tough fellows, tough algal species that can resist the pollution will remain. So the species diversity narrows down. Sometimes you become one or two species, all the others have died. And also they multiply very rapidly. Because there is no competition, as well as they have plenty of nutrients, they multiply and form what are called algal blooms, huge amounts of algae. That is an indication of pollution. Okay? And invariably, when you see such blooms, most of them, those are the blue bees. They can withstand a lot of pollution as well as they produce toxins. That's the danger. In fact, they produce toxins as a defense mechanism to prevent them being destroyed by other algal consumers or other. So then the diversity becomes narrow and ends up with toxin producing bees. So if a water body algal biomass is more and the species are mostly toxin producing blue bees, then we know that that water body is polluted. Now we'll see what has happened in Sri Lanka. Way back in 1907, much before you and I were born, there have been records of some of the algae recorded in Sri Lanka. These are available in the herbarium and the botanic gardens, these reports. And they have, even at that time, Professor Rich, in fact, I learned from algae from his textbook. Those days, this textbook was the most favorite. He has come to Sri Lanka and visited he has examined 9 reservoirs, mostly from Anuradhapura area, one from Ampare, one from Trincomalee and also obviously the Berry Lake in Colombo, and recorded that the populations were small, diversity high. They were not polluted at that time. Predominantly cyanobacteria were non-toxic. Most of the cyanobacteria that he recorded were not toxic. So all this indicate that at that time our water bodies were relatively pure, not polluted. But by 1950s, the records of Berry Lake shows that it had a predominance of microcystis, which is a toxin-producing blue-green alga. We know that Berry Lake was completely green sometime. Now it has been drenched and cleared, but it still contains only very few algae, spirulina, microcystis, and some antennas, and microcystis predominantly, and that's a toxin-producing blue-green alga. So it has got polluted. Now we ourselves conducted some surveys in 1998. This was published, and the work covered from 1992 onwards by the Water Supply and Drainage Board, or these who came from Water Supply and Drainage Board. And myself was involved in that. We had 11 reservoirs, 9 had toxin-producing microcystis, and Pseudosperms as dominant. Again, an indication of pollution of our reservoirs. This is Nuwarawa, Basawakkulama, Tisarawa, Nachiduwa, I can remember, Polonnaruwa tanks, most of the dry zones we covered. As well as we looked at reservoirs at Labugama and Kaltuawa, the two reservoirs that are supplying water to Colombo. They were good. They had little algae, diversity of algae. Why? Because the catchment areas for those two reservoirs are protected. No human activity there. No one is allowed to go and live there. So if we can protect our catchment areas, then we can minimize pollution. But you can't do that with irrigation tanks in our area. They are meant for irrigation. They are meant for cultivation of crops. So you can't have it both ways. But you must minimize the pollution coming from above, from these areas, from Horton Plains, from Amgavel, from Nuwaraeli area, because those are the streams. But what is happening today is the tea estates are loading their estate plantations with chemicals, vegetable cultivations overloading chemicals. Even our dry zone farmers are now loading urea because it's subsidized and virtually free. They just only 20%, 30% is taken by the plant. Rest of the 70% goes into the water. So we have to change those, because otherwise we see clearly. And again in 2004, we did a survey in Nichai tank. This is in the eastern province. Predominantly these two toxin-producing areas. Then another where we had a cascade of tanks from Senanayaka Samudra to Hirimudawa tank, Aligalge tank, finally Konduwattuwana tank. We found when it came to Konduwattuwana, Ampare, Pseudospermopsis counts were about 15,000 units per milliliter. Huge amount of toxin producing. And this year, in fact, one of our graduate students, Rutika Perwa, she is now doing her PhD. It's a mid-year report, so she has covered 61 reservoirs and tanks in Sri Lanka, virtually covering almost everything. Predominance of toxigenic cyanobacteria with a preponderance of Cylindrospermopsis is a toxin-producing alga. In fact, the toxin is called Cylindrospermopsin. Even Dr. Maganarachu, following my lecture, has determined toxins in some of these waters quantitatively. And for the first time, we see the appearance of Cylindrospermopsis even in water bodies of Nuwaraeli, which are supposed to be very pure and good water. Even in the Nuwaraeli Lake, the Gregory Lake, now we see Cylindrospermopsis. So this is not a good sign. This means we have to take some immediate steps that to minimize this pollution. Okay, now I would like to conclude. Development is necessary, but should harmonize with the environment, protection of biodiversity and conservation. attention should be paid to sustainable utilization. I am not saying that we should not use natural resources. We have to use. But they should be used in a sustainable manner. Instead of destroying them, instead of overexploiting them, we must always take care of our resources and use part of it sustainably, so that we can go on and leave it for the future generations as well. Essentially, the human species claims to be the leaders among all living beings, among all living things, because we are so intelligent. Now, if we are the most powerful, if we are the leader, then that leadership should be earned. I would say, remember this, take this message home. Human species should earn its leadership position among Earth living organisms by playing a more benevolent role, a more protective role towards the others, less intelligent living things. They just live. They don't know what's happening. If we are intelligent, we should make use of them, but at the same time protect them and sustain them. Thank you.